I understand things, you know. Things don't stay the same. You gotta go with change. I get it. But everything going on in the city is like ridiculous. And all the problems go back to these gentrifiers, most of them white. Come here from other places, they got their dogs walking around the neighborhood and they look at you like you trash. Just look at the one who let his dog poop on Howard University. I mean, it just tells you what they think about us, what they think about the city. And they trying to block the Redskins from coming back to the old RFK site? And last I heard, the neighborhood folks, and you know who the neighborhood folks are, were trying to turn it into a big farm or something. Got their rows of corn growing or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why? Y'all ain't never, for 400 or 500 years now, y'all ain't like farming before? You know? What you liking it for now? You picking cotton now? You growing corn now? What's up? You racist? What's happening? You trying to do some revisionist history here? And that name change for the Redskins, I don't like it. I'm against it. Black folk gonna look at me like I'm crazy, especially liberal black folks. They're like, oh man, Howard, Fish or Kingfish or whatever name they want to call me that day. You ain't woke. You ain't woke. It's clearly racist. And I'm like, well, I ain't heard anything from any tribe, no Native Americans. No Native Americans have had an issue with it except for maybe a handful. I've seen more that don't have a problem with it, and only those folks can decide whether something's racist or not. And for some of them to say it's not racist, we've got to respect that they're divided on the issue. And I'm not hearing enough of them. I'm hearing liberal white folks and a lot of liberal black folks doing all the complaining. And I'm like, who are you? You're not Native American. Why are you even talking? There are more important issues you need to be working on, like systematic oppression against black folk. How about the judicial system? Fix that against black folks. The banking and the credit system. Fix that against black folk financially. Fix the educational system that's oppressing black folks. I don't care nothing about the changes of the names and all that stuff, man. It's superficial for me. It's surface stuff. I don't care about no damn Redskins, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate football team. Because guess what? The Redskins hold the distinct honor of having the first black president in the NFL. For the first in 100 years. They also hold the distinct honor of having the first black woman coach and more black starting quarterbacks than any other franchise in the league. They also hold the distinct honor of having more black vice presidents and executives, which is unprecedented in the NFL. Because the National Football League is a very racist and sacred place, okay? So you got to give respect and props to Daniel Snyder. He's always made sure that black men have gotten paid, and now black women too. He just promoted another woman. She a white woman, but she's a vice president, so she holds the highest position for a woman in the entire National Football League. So here it is. He's doing stuff that's helping us. And don't get me wrong, I do not like Daniel Snyder. Can't stand him. He's a terrible owner. But he's doing the work part, putting black folk in very successful places, doing things, tangible things that I can see. So I don't care about superficial agendas. I'm so sick of it. I don't care about the changing the names. I don't care if you keep Jefferson Davis Highway. I don't care. Y'all tearing down these former racist redneck dude statues down? Good, cool, I'm cool with it. I ain't got no problem with that. I got no issues with that. But what's gonna change? In the system, that's what I'm talking about. Is that lynching bill gonna get passed? Because that's the one I'm waiting on. How about changing the Constitution from 3/5 of a man? How about changing it to 5/5 of a man for black folks? And what about statehood for DC? Taxation without representation? We paying the highest taxes in the country, and yet and still we don't have a vote in Senate. And we ain't gonna talk about trafficking. The human suffering going on out here. Every 5 minutes, oh, where our baby girl at? And this sister is missing, and so is gone missing. I mean, come on. Man, it's ridiculous. So that's what I want to see happen. Those are the things I want to see worked on. That's where I get conservative on you, where I'm not quote unquote liberal progressive at. Because that's where the issues come in for me. I want to see real stuff happening, real change.
I'm a husband and father. I'm a professor of political science at Howard University, scholar, activist, and writer. My life's work is to add context and understanding to the bewildering world around us. My world's a very particular one because I live in Washington, D.C. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution of the United States grants Congress complete authority over the District of Columbia. This clause creates an infirmity that renders all the residents of the district without the same measure of democracy enjoyed by Americans in the states. Since 1973, Congress allows for certain powers of government to be carried out by locally elected D.C. officials through limited home rule. But the district's elected government exists at the pleasure of Congress, where D.C. has no vote. In law, Congress can revoke our local D.C. government at any time. Just as in practice, my right to due process in the courts might be obstructed without accountability by the weight of systematic racism on my neck. Rest assured, the story of Washington, D.C. has been a civil rights story since its inception. I was born in Washington, D.C., as was my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather. And we all deserved a voice in our own American governance. And after 5 generations, even my children have yet to fully get it. Our family home was built in 1886, barely 20 years after the Civil War. It's a 3-story brick townhouse on a small one-way street smack dab in the middle of the city. Our house is 134 years old. And in all this time, this structure has only been owned by 2 families, one white, one black. First family was the Willard family. And if that sounds familiar, it's because they owned a lot of Washington, including the famous Willard Hotel. Second family is mine. When in 1935, my great-grandfather rented that house for my great-grandmother and their children. They passed that house and the rent bill on to my grandpa and my grandmama, who raised my dad and all his siblings in that house. We stopped renting in 1969 when my father's generation was finally able to overcome the government-designed obstacles of redlining and restrictive racist bank policies to obtain a mortgage and buy the house that had been our home for decades. In essence, my family paid for our house twice, through 40 years of rent and then a 30-year mortgage. And that's progress. Progress born out of civil rights protests that pivoted to politics, that pivoted to power to create the change. That pivot is all about voting. Voting is the key, which is so often denied, or suppressed, or ignored, or forgotten. Passion may fuel protests, but in the end, change requires the simple American ideal of getting all American adults to vote. Except voting in America may also require overcoming the overwhelming obstacles that some Americans create to deny other Americans this right, like voter registration purges, or shutting down polling stations, or messing with the U.S. Postal Service, or creating different rules for those living in the district. Rest assured, since its construction, Washington, D.C. has always been steeped in duality. There's the Washington, which houses the political gymnasium of our nation. And then there's D.C., which is home to our schools, churches, and community. Washington is where I work. D.C. is where I live. There's the Washington of white buildings and the D.C. of enslaved black men and women who built it. There's the Washington where Martin Luther King spoke on the steps of the Lincoln Monument, and D.C. where he sat and drank lemonade at our house. The history of Washington, D.C. is that of a majority black city that for decades functioned as an agency of the federal government. A federal government that imposed segregation and denied proper resources to most of its residents with no accountability. A city where today our 700,000 residents pay more federal taxes per capita than any other state. The Black Lives Matter protests have a whole other resonance here, not only because this is the capital of the most powerful nation in the world, but because the disenfranchisement of its residents is deliberate. We have rented the home we helped build long enough.
Black lives matter! 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 No peace! No peace! No peace! No peace! No peace!
Growing up in Arkansas, I look back on my life, realizing now that we didn't think about race a lot, and that shaped a lot of my youth. Not thinking about or talking about race makes white people feel as if somehow we are absolved from the impact of white supremacy on people of color. But what I know now, looking back, I realize that a viewpoint of indifference is still a viewpoint. It's complicity. It wasn't until I went to college in Illinois that I really began to examine the role of white supremacy in our lives and in our systems. That awakening was like a sledgehammer, shattering my preconceived notions of what I desperately wanted the country to be. It broke me open and shifted me in ways that created a kind of strain between myself and certain members of my family. It reminds me of when I was in seminary a few years later, and I'm sitting there shocked by the resistance of my classmates to denounce the election of Trump. A man who uses shame, domination, and alienation to terrorize the marginalized. When Jesus himself said, Blessed are the poor, I come to be a servant, and even wash the feet of his own disciples. And if the biblical sense of sin is in fact about the communal alienation of the marginalized, how can we not see the president as an embodiment of what is anti-Christ? And although Trump is but a symptom of the wellspring of white supremacy. He's not its beginning, and he is not its end. I still think we have to resist him, if not for ourselves, then for the most marginalized. Resist his white supremacist vision of the country, resist his patriarchal vision of the country, resist his homophobic and transphobic view of the country. We have to resist. That's why I went down there on June 1st, because I remember that Jesus was for the poor, for the widow, for the marginalized. Priests cannot simply be sitting in our buildings. We need to be advocating for change, and sometimes, yes, that means out in the world. Protesting is a part of our work. My faith demands it. Jesus modeled it. That's why I went down there on the 1st, and I was able to witness people being together in community and demanding what was right. I was not there, however, when the president got the military to attack the protesters for his photo op. I had just left 15 minutes before. 15 minutes. You know, my father voted for him in 2016, and it's all set, I think, to vote for him again. And I'm trying, you know, I told him, Dad, you know what I do. You know I protest. Look what's happening in Portland. What is there to say, Dad, if you vote for him again, that I won't be picked up by some secret police and thrown in a secret prison, who knows where, never to be seen again? Is that what you want for me? Can you live with that happening to your son? And I'm trying to talk to him about it in a way that will maybe activate some level of care in him, some level of desire to do what is the right thing to do. I know he loves me, and maybe through that love I can reach him. I walk the perimeter of the White House, praying, reciting Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And also I think about him as he left the Garden of Gethsemane and stared the horrors of the state in the face and denounced them. I pray for this country, for those who are impacted by injustice. Remembering Jesus' words, these words of radical inclusion and love and equality. I do that walk to remind myself that the power structures of this country and our deep responsibility to people of color. I do that walk to remind myself that the opposite of systematic oppressiveness, of evil, of sin, is in fact a radically inclusive, expansive, awe-inspiring, and revolutionary form of liberation and love.
Mr. President, your thoughts right now?
Put your mask on!
Is that your Bible? People mean well, but they don't check their sources. White lady at my church posted some crazy article on Facebook that was just wrong, not credible at all, and I was offended. So I commented on her post. You can guess what happened after that. But you can't hide at church, and we kept seeing each other week after week. She finally apologized just a little while ago. God's really doing something with the hearts there. Don't get me wrong. There are still a lot of people who don't think that there's a problem, but people are waking up. God is always reminding us that he's fighting for justice and wants us to fight too, even in our personal relationships. You see, I've always been a people pleaser. Get the good grades, get the good job, marry well, pressure to be the best all the time. I already see the same traits forming in my older son. He's 6. At some point, you're gonna fail with that kind of super standard, right? Sometimes I lose myself in that achiever mindset, especially nowadays. Oh, I care so much about sources because I used to work in public relations. And in PR, it's all about the angle. You're trained to think like the brand, deliver what's best for the company you work for, pushing your own beliefs down. You need to keep a strong sense of self, like a coalition funded by Big Pharma that you have to believe in to work for. You end up selling your soul a little bit. As I got older, I found I was more unwilling to do that. I developed strong boundaries around my convictions. Self-preservation, right? You gotta believe your own PR. It took me, still takes me, a long time to emotionally process what's happening. I wanna be engaged in everything. The protests, the discussions, the straight up fights. But it still takes me a long time before I can talk about it, post things on social media, because I have to step back, see the big picture, grieve, and then get it together. I feel obligated to get it together because I want to be charitable. I feel obligated to be charitable for others who need it, like the people at my church. But I want to protect my own mental health, you know? My husband and I wanted to talk about what was happening to our kids, so we drove downtown last weekend. We didn't even plan on getting out of the car. We wanted to show our boys what protests looked like so they could form their own impressions beyond what they saw on the TV screen. We drove in. The city was like ash. So many things burnt. It felt like a war zone. The evidence of things on fire, police presence, tear gas, masses of people, the burning of streets. The white noise became clear in that drive. We weren't sure it was safe. I've tried to explain the concept of what was happening to them, big concepts and small nuggets of information they could understand. But they understand more than we give them credit for, though. A man was killed by a bad police officer. But George Floyd was far from the first. But only God has a responsibility for changing a moment into a movement. When Trayvon Martin was killed, something in me woke up. I suddenly realized people who I know and love could be taken from me for doing nothing wrong. When Ahmaud Arbery happened, it felt like a veil got lifted for people at my church. But it was undeniable. He did nothing wrong. I haven't always been bold about my convictions. I didn't feel my physical presence could make a difference, so I stayed home. I watched the news, I read articles, I kept up with conversations about race relations in the United States. I wrote, too, using my online blog. It's so clear to me right now that God's grace has been working in every part of my life. I'm supposed to be sharing my stories with others. They don't need to be perfect because they're mine. God loves me, flaws and all. That's so freeing, right? If we're all made in the image of a good God, then you have to treat others like they have worth. God doesn't give us anything we can't handle. He wants us to fight for justice and dignity, just as he did. We ended up getting out of the car. As soon as we did, we were stopped by the media eyeing our kids for an interview. The 3-year-old, he's a little stubborn one, does what he wants. When they asked him why he was at the protest, he said, I'm here because I want to be here. My 6-year-old said, I want everyone to look up and do the right thing. The wisdom of babes. I hope we're raising them right. They give me hope for the next generation. They are my gift to the future. I can't believe change isn't on the horizon. I have to believe the best because my boys are growing up in this. They're making noise. So I'm making noise. And no revolution ever came without a little bit of noise. It's been a long time coming.
I felt pretty helpless. I wanted to be out on the street, join the protests. I am a loud mouth for justice, but I'm immunocompromised. I have diabetes, so COVID is really, really, really scary. But hey, I know people. Networking, that's what I do. And there's got to be others that want to support what's happening from a distance. So I gather people. Well, theater people mostly. The revolution needs stage managers, right? I become the guy in the chair for my protesting friends, coordinating what they need to stay safe. On Facebook, Twitter, every social media platform, we recruit volunteers, support the supply chain of water, food, first aid, and PPE for the protest drop sites. We report where the violent outbreaks are, where the police activity is particularly fierce, where the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, alt-right are causing trouble. And I verify that it's actually happening, not Russian bot stuff. I mean, information is so corruptible when the world is on fire. But when we heard that military personnel were firing tear gas and rubber bullets on citizens in Lafayette Park, rubber bullets which are neither rubber nor bullets, but exploding metal canisters that can kill you. I mean, this was not an intimidation tactic. Those troops were trying to hurt us. And when they cattled peaceful protesters with helicopters on Swan Street, I thought, is this it? As a queer person of color, you're always prepared for violence. I mean, I've been harassed on the metro with multiple people being vocally anti-queer, yelled at for speaking Chinese into my phone. But seeing that level of violent response to asking for Black lives to matter, I thought, is this the moment when the scales tip? When all of us with targets on our back have to fight for our lives? Do I say, God, immunocompromisation be damned, I am going out? Even with masks, hand washing, you can still get sick. And people were depending on me. I had their safety in my hands. So I stay in, double down, monitor protest locations, share status updates, follow live feeds of friends being actively stalked by people in uniform, white friends. I mean, I'm online 10, 12, 15 hours a day. A lot of us are, working for no pay, juggling responsibilities, managing people's energy, but I hit a wall. I thought I could keep stealing from future energy to get things done now. I mean, that's what theater people do, right? The show must go on. No, the show can pause. If I'm broken, I'm no good to anyone, least of all myself. I took a week for radical self-care. Came back re-energized. Now I work more in the micro. I'm not sure how much change we can affect on the grand scale, but we can affect our communities. We can clean our own house, fiercely interrogate the systems that oppress us, all of us, and then light a few controlled forest fires. Burn down some standing trees to make room for new growth. Then we move towards justice and healing. There's enough Buddhism in my background to believe that now is where we're supposed to be. We have to sit in the discomfort and ask ourselves, what is all this trying to teach us? The lesson from where I sit? Something new is trying to be born. Maybe we need to get out of the way, get out of our own way, and let it happen.
35 years, I've attended a church that says every Sunday, we are open, we are progressive, we are inclusive, justice is our passion. And yet I've had to call them on that. The pastor, the associate pastor, the church leaders. Now, I've not tackled it from a peer-to-peer point of view because it's too sensitive. People really get their backs up when they think they're so progressive. And I've used George Floyd's death to dialogue with people, some that I've known for 30 years, but who I've never talked to about race, justice. Justice is such a passion for them. And yet I've had to say, in what way have we earned the right to say justice is our
Justice
passion?
is action. You know, sometimes when you're called, you just have to go. At our point in life, we don't have any power. We're retired. There isn't much we can do anymore. And when something like this happens, when a policeman kneels on a citizen's neck and kills him, there is a need for bodies in the streets. It makes a difference.
For me, it was easy to make the decision to go out and protest, whether or not there was a virus. I wore my mask. I made the sign that said, justice for one, change for all. We need change in terms of how people are treated. And what bothers me the most is this country is so entrenched in its lack of racial justice, lack of tolerance for anyone who is different. See, we need a completely new mindset, but how do you change the hearts and minds of people? We need police reform. I am talking about giving the police a narrower list of tasks so that some real professionals with knowledge and maybe some humanity can handle the other tasks. It's completely outrageous that someone who is really not committing a crime or who is engaged in a minor infraction or who has a mental health situation gets killed by the knee, a chokehold, shot in the back. That's unacceptable. But how do we change it, right?
Changing the police isn't going to fix the problem. The problems are numerous, overlapping. One reason why we have such an expensive healthcare system in this country is that we use it to clean up messes in other systems. And on the whole, our educational system isn't serving all the people in our country. We are 66 years beyond Brown versus Board of Education. That was 1954. And in D.C., we're only graduating 60% of our students from high school. If we could fix the schools, people with more education use less health care. They're less likely to commit crimes and end up in jail. If we could raise the minimum wage so that people who work could actually make a living without having to have 2 and 3 jobs. Traditional family values are that men should be the breadwinners. But how can men be breadwinners after 40 years of deindustrialization, where we got rid of all the good paying jobs that men used to do? We can reduce demand for the police by fixing the schools and some of these other things. But we've got too many people that are just too self-satisfied. I've got it really good. Why should I do anything to help other people?
Yes, you see, it's not just one thing by itself. Justice, racial justice especially, is numerous and overlapping. Look, right here in D.C., we are American citizens who politically and in many other ways have no voice. Okay, I love D.C., but we are tax-paying citizens without representation in Congress. We've been second-class citizens for too long.
I was born a citizen of this country, and I resent the fact that I'm being deprived of my rights. We don't live in the United States. We're American citizens, but we don't live in a state. We live in a territory that's occupied by troops of a foreign nation. Even recently, our government has sent in foreign troops to molest our citizens exercising their rights. Now, you can go through the Declaration of Independence, which passed the preamble as a list of grievances against the king. You can go through some of those and see that we've got good grounds for complaining against our government. And we pass laws that regulate the ownership of guns. And in D.C. versus Heller, they overturned those laws. They blocked our laws legalizing marijuana, and they forbid us from spending our own money to provide health services to the poor, particularly abortions, which we wanted to provide as part of comprehensive health care, but Congress said, well, you can't. This isn't right.
We should be able to govern ourselves. And in a city where the African American population is still the majority, you can't separate sovereignty, statehood, and racial justice.
Mom used to say everybody here is from somewhere else. Well, she never visited D.C., but that sure describes it. No, I like the fluidity of people in and out every couple of years. It skews liberal, but it's pretty cosmopolitan. If I had a wife and kids, I absolutely could not be here, but for right now, D.C. suits me fine. Now, as an Army brat, I lived everywhere. The college years were tough. Dad struggled. Mom got cancer, and I became her in-home hospice care. Out of law school, I worked in Detroit, Miami, Houston, Chicago, San Francisco, all over. But I've been in D.C. longer than anywhere else. I guess I understand transience. You make friends, they leave. You love somebody, you let them go. Mom used to say, think of life as a bunch of fresh starts. I have my own practice. It's pretty varied, but it's pretty dead right now. So I closed up my office for a couple of weeks and took a drive. Down through Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and then up through Arkansas, across Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, and then back home. I love this country. Yeah, if you believe the media hype, the anti-maskers are the crazy conservatives in the South. But you want to know where they were most serious about wearing masks? Mississippi. I mean, those folks know they have the highest rates of obesity and comorbidity. They're serious about staying home and wearing their masks down there. But that's not what gets reported. My dad used to say, it's not enough to hear it, you gotta know it. Now, everything here is transactional. DC doesn't make anything. Everybody's got federal jobs and their lives are independent of the economy. Now, we have to get people back to work, but DC people can afford to stay closed because it doesn't affect them. And for all its great restaurants and bars and concerts and botanical gardens, DC is the worst run city in America. Home rule? Hell no. It's more dysfunctional here than Detroit and New Orleans combined. Have you been to DC motor vehicles? No, people don't want to hear this, but DC government was at its best under the control board. Make DC a state, you got pure chaos and corruption. DC needs a sovereign authority that can step in like a parent. Now, in the states, you've got the governor to supervise the mayors, and the state keeps the cities in check. Well, who's going to keep a city-state called DC in check? And if this was just about representation, you could take a section of DC and give it back to Maryland, just like Arlington was given back to Virginia. No. Now, this is an exercise in raw power to get more Dems in the Senate. My Democrat and moderate Republican friends all favor some version of statehood. They're the newly arrived gentry that wants the vote, but I'm sorry, the Constitution is clear. You knew that when you came here. If you don't like it, move. Upper middle class gentrification has brought in fantastic amounts of money, yet DC has the highest violent crime rate, an embarrassing adult illiteracy rate, and trash collection so bad it's a public health threat. All that money, and they can't do anything but ticket restaurants for using plastic straws. If you ask me, we should treat DC the way the British government treats Hong Kong and Singapore. We have it good in this country, and people are tearing it down. Portland has got nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, and it started long before George Floyd. 8 months ago, you couldn't wear a MAGA hat on the streets of Portland without getting assaulted. It's Antifa. It's the second coming of Occupy Wall Street. They've been occupying and rioting since Trump was elected. Floyd's death just gave them an excuse to get more violent. Now, I draw a distinction between Portland and Louisville. Breonna Taylor was an innocent woman who was wrongfully shot. Portland's just a bunch of spoiled children with nothing else to do but tear the country down. And in the midst of all this, Dems scream, defund the police? Worst thing you could do. Now, I know police departments have their problems. I have been wrongfully detained and defended my clients from unjust policing. But a police department is just a reflection of its community. If you have low education and corruption in your community, you're going to have it in your police. I don't care what color they are. But being a cop is a dirty, dangerous, thankless job. It's utter nonsense to say that all cops are bad. Ask people whose neighborhoods are overrun with drugs and crime. They want police there. If police power is misused, it can be life-destroying. I support reforming the police, but defund the police? People have got to learn that their slogans have deadly consequences. It's easy to get stressed. I try to stay moving. My mom used to say, it's better to listen than to talk. Dad used to say, a moving target's harder to hit. I live somewhere in between those two. I'm finding ways to feel good. I'm making less money, but I'm spending less money. I paid my dues. But who have I paid them to?
I don't consider myself an activist. My sister has been to protests and marches, but it never felt like my thing. Even in college, I was studying business, and I was doing these internships year after year, and eventually I was like, you know what? This is just not fun anymore. I would realize I hadn't talked to another human for hours. And I'm not super extroverted, but I do enjoy talking to people. I ended up taking this career test, and it said that my best career path was bartender. But after bartender was physical therapist, and that actually sounded like a career I would like. But I didn't just become a physical therapist because of the test. I like getting to talk to someone one-on-one and get to understand them in a very personal way and help them. And I've gotten to know so many kinds of people I wouldn't have met otherwise. A lot of Ethiopian, Indian, Hispanic patients. That's something that really surprised me. When we went to the protest, there weren't just black people and white people, but there were Brazilian people, Korean people, everyone. People had signs that said Koreans for Black Lives. It didn't even occur to me to make a sign. The first thing I noticed once we got to Farragut North and started walking to the White House were big tanks and these guards with guns. I mean, this was my first protest, but I was pretty sure that wasn't a normal protest thing. And they weren't even doing anything. They were just blocking the road, and people were taking pictures of them. I didn't take any pictures. I saw a lot of people posing and posting it on their Instagrams, but it didn't seem right to me. If I had posted anything, would that have encouraged other white people to go? Would it have made the protest seem safe to attend, or would that have just made it about me? For example, my mom went with me, but not strictly to support Black Lives. She went because she hates Trump and because she felt that this protest is a part of history and we needed to be able to say we were there. But I'm like, the point is to be there, not to just say we were there, to show up for Black lives, not to make an interesting anecdote. Because this all just... It shouldn't happen, you know? Why is it in this age Black people can just die this way? Enough is enough. Enough has been enough. Enough was always enough. That is silly for me to say. But just something about Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd made it different. Made everyone show up. It felt like the final straw. So even though I was irritated that my mom wasn't there for all the right reasons, the fact that she went at all kind of surprised me. It definitely opens up the opportunity for more conversations with her. And people saw a middle-aged white lady being supportive. Maybe that opens it up to her friends, because if she went, then maybe other middle-aged white ladies she knows will feel more comfortable going. And she can talk about it with her friends. I haven't been back protesting since that day. I mean, it felt important, but also not. Like I was just one person. And now I don't know what actions make enough of a statement. I've signed petitions, but that's it. I used to think just being nice and accepting of everyone was enough. But that's not enough. I have to be active in everything I do. Really listen to people, see if I can step in and help. Be mindful. Not make assumptions. And sometimes, in my profession, it's hard not to make assumptions because I have to determine care for a patient based on their activities. And that requires me to ask questions about their activities and what they do. And I see a lot of the same patterns. Like, just as an example, I work with a lot of late 40s, early 50s Hispanic men. They have a lot of the same physical issues. A lot of them work in construction. Like, that's a stereotype I never thought of before. But eventually, when I would work with another middle-aged Hispanic man, I would ask if he works in construction. But I feel like I can't begin to create an image of someone until I get the full picture. I was talking with one of my clients about the protests. He's this middle-aged man. He's from Trinidad, who is just so cynical. He doesn't think anything will change with his generation, but maybe the younger generations can do it. I'm 26. I'm older than Ahmaud was. I'm part of this younger generation. I feel like I don't know how to be a part of that big change for him, for George Floyd, for others. Maybe I can make a change for my patients, even if it's just for them. That's something I know I can do.
The future keeps me up at night. Yeah, right now everything is so unsure. It seems like something crazy is happening every day in politics and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think about the future a lot. I think about if I'm gonna get married in the future. I think about if I'm gonna study the right things in college, if I'm gonna make the right decisions about the things I wanna study. I wanna study modern culture and media in English. I want to be an author and a social activist lawyer. Right now, I am calm. I just got back from a walk, which was nice, and I'm taking a social media break. And that's been nice, but back when the George Floyd incident happened, I got no sleep for like weeks. I was just constantly up, emailing people signs like for hours constantly every single day. And like that sign over there, see it? That one has a QR code that you can scan and you can get all the resources you need to get justice for Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And there are others with a number you can text too. My friend and I came up with the idea. Started posting them up in neighborhoods all over DC, predominantly white neighborhoods where racism is an afterthought. You don't really have to think about it. It doesn't really affect you. You can hear about it and not have to experience it. And at first we didn't think it would get as big as it did. Thought it'd be a couple of people hanging up signs and that'd be it. But by the end of the first day, we had so many people asking for the signs and it just got bigger and bigger. And then a few days later, I'm not sure if you heard about this, but a few days later, there was an incident with a guy with a bike and he was terrorizing the protesters putting up the signs, literally tried to run them over with the bike. And that viral video really got me emotional because I was like I didn't expect for that kind of reaction to happen. And incidents like that kept happening all over the country, and people kept sending me the videos, and it was just alarming to see that people could have that kind of reaction, because the sign, it wasn't like they were being violent. It was literally just resources for the movement. I got death threats too, not from DC, but from other parts of the country where people were really upset by the signs, which was draining. But it's calming down now, and I am taking a social media break, so. You know, the threats felt motivational too. I mean, it's like, okay, we must be doing something right if people are noticing and they're getting fired up. But the situation with the bike was different because it was actually affecting the people that it was happening to. And it was just a really bad situation all around, and it's really tired me out. I was tired all the time. And then when I did get sleep, after the first few months of everything happening, I was having these really vivid, really strange dreams. Like I had one really, really strange dream where I imagined a friend of mine, he was running from a police officer, and I was running too, and it was really scary. We were in a field, because my friend and I like nature walks, and we were sitting on a blanket, having a picnic, when suddenly all of the people disappeared except for the black guy who was my friend. He just started running, and I didn't know what he was running from. It was like a POV. I was running along with him, and I could just see his body, and he was running, and he just kept turning back and yelling, police. And then I woke up, and it was just crazy. You know, I feel like this moment is really different. That these protests are really different from anything I've experienced in my lifetime. And the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were some of the first incidences of police brutality that I've experienced since I turned 18, which has been like a major mark on my adulthood. My very first memory was Trayvon Martin, and I mean, they call my generation the Trayvon generation. So, actually, I just saw this post on Instagram. It's a really cool poem about 2020 being like clear vision and stuff like that, and relating to that, I feel like this is a major pivotal point in American history. There's no running from anything anymore. Everything got so exposed this year. Like DC statehood, for instance. I feel like that whole situation with Trump taking that picture, I wonder how that would have turned out if we had more representation in Congress. We just got a lot of work to do, and it feels even more urgent now. And I think in order to make effective change, we really had to see how much work needed to be done. As a gay black person, I always wanted to go into activism, and I'm even more passionate about it now.
Long as I keep all that guala, these bitches gon' do anything for $1. I don't have to run from no Chevy and polish. I call her, let's go.
The connection between art and activism is empathy. The first night of the protests, we got out in front of the White House, and there was a long line of Secret Service and police officers facing us. The city felt angry, but together. There was no violence, not like what was being shown on the news. We were just going around and hearing people's stories, supporting each other, listening. It was just all of us, coming together, sharing a community. That was a strong experience for me. But then we get Trump escalating the whole thing. On the second night, I was hit with a flash bomb. The officer threw it at me. I saw it spark before it hit the ground right at my feet. I turned my head as fast as I could, and I heard it explode and saw the flash of light. I tried to run, but it was disorienting. It wasn't just me. It's only when the cops show up that the tension starts to rise. On day 3, I text my boy Garrett, and we went into the city for more protests. When we walked to the White House, the road was blocked off. They start bringing in helicopters, police on bikes, police in vans. There were so many more police officers and military than I had ever seen before. My adrenaline was pumping. I was ready for whatever at that point. Garrett's grandpa called him and told him, "Don't go into the city tonight. Trump's talking like something's gonna happen." We just brushed it off like, "Aw, he's just being a grandpa to his grandson." Then another friend called me. "Things are getting dangerous out there. Stay safe." And I was like, Well, someone's got to do something. We're marching away from the White House, and the police start redirecting us into the neighborhoods. That's when the protests started dissipating. People were getting ready to go home. The neighborhoods were where most people parked. As we're going to find our car, I turn around and I saw the police had cut off one side of Swan Street. Then I turned back around and I saw they had the other side cut off too. All alleyways, all walkable paths out of the neighborhood were blocked by police. At one end of the road, there was a line of police and a bunch of protesters chanting, "Let us go! Let us go!" On the other end, there was another group of police officers and protesters in front of them. I was in the middle with Garrett. I looked at him and I was like, what are we supposed to do? Then the cops start pushing in on both sides. They were closing in on us, pepper spraying. I was scared. I was like, we're gonna have to fight our way out. But then I looked to my side and there was Raul who was letting people into his apartment. We just took off running towards his steps. The cops chased us in, pepper spraying, trying to get us through the windows. It was mayhem. When we got inside, there were 70 people coughing, crying, pouring milk into each other's eyes. I sat right at this big window, and I watched the people left in the street get arrested one by one. But what could I do? I started documenting everything. I put it all on Twitter. The first 2 hours were pretty tense, but things settled. We were all on the same team. There wasn't conflict inside the house. I started talking to some other people. People were having conversations, smoking, drinking, and hanging out. We even got pizza. The police, though, they tried to get in a couple times. They were using their body cameras to record us through the windows. So we masked up. Some tried to bust people in the backyard. That was pretty scary. One dude showed up at the door saying someone called 911. Raul was like, did anyone here call 911? We were like, no. Dude kept being like, well, I got a call from inside here, so someone inside needs our help. We were like, nobody called. Get off the doorstep. The cop told Raul they can even arrest us after curfew. But when we got out in the morning, there weren't any police around. We left that place with a huge sigh of relief because it was like, wow, we made it through the night. But also, because we left that place a community, people are still in touch. Folks arranged rides for each other, connected on Twitter. Raul and I are pretty close now, too. He's a big supporter of my music, and I kick it at his house a few times a week. The times are uncertain now. The election's coming up, the pandemic has no end in sight, and nobody knows how this is gonna go. But in a way, it's a freeing feeling. I'm focused on my music now, but the biggest learning lesson out of all of this is you need to humanize the people you meet. Everyone has a story. You gotta talk to people on a personal level. You've got to hear their story. Just from that night, I benefited a lot. People inspire me to pursue what makes me happy, and I hope to do the same, you know? We can't control what happens next. So get out there and go.
Sick to my stomach, praying that I don't get caught. Shit is just a break from the come up. Gone when it's sun up. Tell her that it's not my fault.